Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on sleep and your health. My name is Rosemary Nichols, and I'm a health educator for Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Tufts Health Plan. You know, when I think about it, it doesn't make sense that we require less sleep than we did 100 years ago. And yet, according to statistics, on average, we're sleeping about an hour and a half less than we did around 1900. Certainly isn't biological. Most likely, and I think you'd agree with this, it has to do with the way we live today, the amount of stress in our lives, and all of the technology that we have around us, the computers, the phones, the iPads, etc. We're paying a price for this lack of sleep, this sleep deprivation. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the importance of sleep and the fact that it's not a luxury. So to begin with, how much sleep do we need? Well, according to Dr. David Dingus, who's at University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine, we need about seven and a half hours a night. Because when we have less than that, particularly when it drops off to six and a half hours or less, we start to see an increase in the number of disorders. So we should be aiming for at least seven and a half hours. And the National Sleep Foundation says some of us may need as much as 9. So, as I said, sleep is a biological necessity. It is not a luxury, kind of the thing that people give up. They may not give up the exercise, the dietary factors, etc., but they feel that, oh, I can just get less sleep and continue on with my daily life. Well, here's what science tells us. Here's what we know. When you're sleep deprived, it negatively impacts your blood pressure and your blood sugar. We talk about metabolic dysfunction. We're going to see why some of this occurs as we continue on. It increases chronic inflammation. Now, inflammation is important when you get an injury, for example. It helps the healing process. But chronic inflammation, low-level chronic inflammation, contributes to a number of chronic diseases. And in fact, even our aging, not chronological, but our biological aging, it negatively impacts the immune system so that we're more likely to get colds and, respiratory illnesses. We may not respond sometimes as well to the vaccines that we get. When you're sleep deprived, you don't handle your stressors as well. You're more irritable. And the studies show us that as it progresses over time, it can lead to mood disorders, anxiety, and even depression. It negatively impacts memory and learning. Sleep is important for memory, whether it's the kind of memory that's procedural, learning to ride a bike or play the flute, or declarative kind of learning, things that we remember, for example, for a test, book learning. It decreases ability to focus. Well, you know that when you have a rough night, it's hard to focus the next day. And this increases the risk of injury. We know that it contributes to a lot of automobile accidents, those micro sleeps that occur sometimes with people. It just takes a few seconds. It negatively impacts tissue repair, muscle growth, and protein synthesis. And believe it or not, it influences hormones that will contribute to weight gain. For example, leptin and ghrelin levels will move in the wrong direction. And when you're tired, you certainly don't feel much like exercising, which can help us to maintain body weight. So, is sleep linked to our health? Yes. ultimately, after what we just reviewed, it has been linked to the increased risk of high blood pressure or hypertension, type 2 diabetes, obesity, mood disorders, and believe it or not, autoimmune disease. We get a dysfunction in the immune system. So not only may we have difficulty with respiratory infections, we're more likely to get sick, but autoimmune disease is where our immune system starts to see the self as an intruder. In other words, and attacks our own tissues, much like rheumatoid arthritis. So we see a link to an increased risk of rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, for example. An increased risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. I put in red here. Remember that medical conditions have multiple risk factors. So sleep can certainly contribute to these. And depending on, how sleep deprived you are, more or less to any number of these disorders. But there may be other factors in our lives as well, right? Multifactorial. So let's talk about the stages of sleep. There are 4 stages: 2 light, stage 3, which is a deeper sleep, a delta sleep, and the REM sleep. And we cycle through these several times each night, and each cycle is roughly 90 minutes or so. The non-REM, non-rapid eye movement refers to, these are the first 3 stages. The light sleep 1, 2, and the deep sleep stage 3. So we see a slowing of our physiology, heart rate, breathing, for example, body temperature decreases, and most of the restorative benefits, in other words, for this biological necessity, occur during stage 3 non-REM. Excuse me. Hormone release, tissue growth, and repair. REM, or rapid eye movement, or active sleep, it's about 20% of our total sleep time. The first time it occurs is about 90 minutes into sleeping. So we have 3 to 5 periods, and the initial periods are quite short, can be around 5 minutes or so. And as we move toward the morning, they're closer to an hour. Heart rate and respiration will increase, although body temperature is at its lowest, and we get heightened brain activity. So we see brain activity more like what we see during the day when we're awake. Most dreaming occurs during REM, although some can occur in non-REM sleep. So sometimes people say, well, what is REM important for? Well, we believe now it's important for mood regulation, as well as a memory, believe it or not, procedural memory. So non-REM sleep, stage 3, and REM sleep, both of those in particular are important for memory. Science is looking at different types of memory, and during REM, emotional memory, for example. Sleep is regulated by 2 processes, the homeostatic and the circadian. Homeostatic, the longer you're awake, the more you'll need to sleep. And it's a buildup of something called adenosine from ATP, which our cells use as the energy source. And this ATP will attach to cells, and we will begin to get tired. Interestingly, caffeine attaches to those same receptors on those cells, and that's what keeps us awake at night if we drink coffee too close to bedtime, for example. The circadian rhythms, sort of a built-in thing, based on a 24-hour cycle. We have a master clock in part of the brain, in the hypothalamus, and it's based on a 24-hour cycle, and it responds primarily to light and dark. So can we fool around with these circadian rhythms and have somewhat of a dysfunction? Or yes, we can. They impact not only your sleep and your sleep-wake cycle. So when the sun comes up in the morning, even if your eyes are closed, if that sunlight goes through the eyelids, it will stimulate you to wake up. But it's also important for hormones and eating behavior and blood pressure and body temperature. And so if we have a malalignment of these circadian rhythms, because it's sort of messed up. We stay up too late, and we spend too much time on our computers and phones where the light is coming into the eyes and ultimately going to the brain, and it mixes up those signals. We can have a dysfunction here, and ultimately it can affect all these other things. Abnormal circadian rhythms, we know, are associated not only with insomnia, but we talked earlier about, sleep deprivation, obesity, diabetes, depression, etc. So what is insomnia? How would you define that? It's difficulty getting to sleep or staying asleep, but with associated daytime consequences, the irritability, the lack of focus, you're out of sorts, moods, difficulty concentrating. So we have unrefreshing sleep with insomnia. You might even spend 8 or 9 hours in bed and you wake up and you don't feel refreshed. And as I said, the daytime sleepiness, the problems with concentration, with irritability, learning, etc. And it can be transient, a couple of nights, short term for a couple of weeks, or chronic, oftentimes diagnosed as 3 months or more. Some agencies will say a month or more, but of problem sleeping at least 3 nights. Some of them say every night. So anywhere from a month, but 3 months on. Some people do have chronic insomnia, and we need to deal with this. So what makes it difficult to fall asleep or stay asleep? Even when you have the chance to do so, we'll take a look at the pie. Certainly, we know stress. We'll talk about briefly a number of medical conditions. If you've ever had chronic pain or some kind of an injury, that if you were to lie on a certain side, it would make it difficult to fall asleep or stay asleep. You know how pain can interfere with sleep. Certain medications, and certainly alcohol and caffeine, and some sleep disorders, such as sleep apnea, for example, which we know is tied to high blood pressure, and where people constantly, they stop breathing for just very short periods of time, and they awaken. It wakes the brain to sort of catch that breath, and so that they can breathe. Restless leg syndrome is another. So there are certain sleep disorders. There are many medical conditions that affect your sleep. We're not going to go into detail, but if you look at the list, they range from ADHD and Alzheimer's to all the way down through asthma, different breathing problems. Most of us know what GERD is, what we consider that heartburn, depression, thyroid dysfunction. So sometimes it's the condition itself, and other times it can be the medication that people are taking and that needs to be adjusted. For a lot of us, it's really about stress, isn't it? You have those nights when you have difficulty sleeping because maybe you've had a bad day at work, you've had an argument with someone and it wasn't resolved, and this is an important person. You're overworked, time management problems, illness in the family. So we know that stress can cause periodic bouts of insomnia. And we also, as I mentioned earlier, know that if you have chronic sleep problems, they can decrease our ability to deal with stress. We know that we're more irritable. We don't cope with our stressors as well the next day or during those few days or that week. And it can cause anxiety. I mean, just look at this gentleman. He's turned his clock. You can see it. But imagine that clock is facing him and he doesn't get a good night's sleep and he keeps watching the clock. Eventually, just even going to bed and the anxiety around not being able to sleep either fall asleep or stay asleep or both during the night, that in and of itself can cause anxiety. A lack of sleep can be a causal factor that contributes to the development of mood disorders, not only anxiety, but depression. So we need to identify and deal with our stress. So we have a half hour, and this half hour is not a webinar on stress. But dealing with our stress is so important, identifying it, using adaptive coping methods as opposed to maladaptive coping methods that don't work and maybe even make the situation worse, such as stress eating or smoking or drinking too much, etc. What about caffeine and alcohol? Well, we know caffeine is a drug that acts as a stimulant, right? It attaches to the receptor sites on the cells and will block the adenosine. Caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours. Now, we all metabolize it a little bit differently. Some people more quickly than others. And so some people can drink coffee a little bit later in the day and be less affected by it. But having a half-life means that if you have coffee at 6 o'clock, half the caffeine in that cup of coffee is with you 6 hours later at midnight. I think most of us get to know, over time when we have to cut the caffeine. I have learned that when I was younger, I could drink coffee a little bit later in the day, and I know now I cannot. And I know I need to cut it off by noontime if I don't want to have it affect my sleep. Not only does it make it harder to fall asleep, what we call sleep latency, but we're in those lighter sleep stages. And so we wake up more frequently. When you're in stage 1 and 2, noises, etc., will wake you up more easily. And it's a diuretic, so it causes an increase in urination. So you may have to get up during the night a few times. And alcohol, you probably should shut that off about 4 hours before bedtime. Now, we know that it helps you to fall asleep sooner, but it affects REM sleep, and the sleep is lighter. So again, you're more likely to wake up frequently. And if you have sleep apnea, it's going to exacerbate it, particularly if yours is obstructive. And, for many people, especially guys, women too, as we age, the region of the throat, those muscles lose some of their tone. And if you sleep on your back as well, the tongue rolls back. And you experience what we call sleep apnea, and you continue to wake up. Well, alcohol relaxes those muscles, and so it's going to exacerbate the issue. And much like caffeine, it's a diuretic. It's going to increase the need to urinate during the night. What about exercise and eating patterns? Well, moderate exercise intensity, like taking a brisk walk or a light jog, for example, playing doubles tennis, actually shortens sleep latency and improves the depth and duration of sleep. It's good for us, particularly if we can do it in sync with getting a little bit of sunlight at the same time. Because, that can help to correct those circadian rhythms, that sunlight earlier in the day. We should all try to get out and get some sun during the day. And moderate exercise. Some people say, well, what about exercise at night? For most people, as long as it's not too close to bedtime and vigorous, it's okay. And we have, those people we'll call them not larks, but night owls. And they, according to research, they can probably exercise a little more vigorously, a little closer to bedtime, And because they fall asleep a little bit later too, it works for them. But for most of us, not, too vigorous and not too close to bedtime. And eating patterns, you want to avoid large meals and beverages about 3 hours before you go to bed. Nothing worse than going to bed if you're hungry, so a light snack would be fine. Maybe you can have some crackers with some low-fat cheese or a little bit of yogurt with some fruit, um, peanut butter on a banana, something that's light, maybe some herb tea. But large meals are going to make it more difficult to sleep. And if you have any gastric reflux, GERD, it's going to exacerbate that if it's a big meal. What about pain? Well, we know that chronic pain creates a vicious cycle. When it comes to sleep deprivation, it's bidirectional. In other words, the pain will make our sleeping more difficult. It leads to poor sleep. And on the other hand, when we don't sleep well, our pain threshold is lower, so we experience more pain. So it kind of works both ways. So we need to deal with chronic pain, and we should do that anyway, because chronic pain really results in an increase in those stress hormones, particularly cortisol, which contribute to a number of chronic diseases. And by the way, aging, yes. And many prescription drugs, by the way, can interfere with sleep. So if you have trouble sleeping, you want to check with the pharmacist and your healthcare provider. Maybe you need to make a change in some of your medications sometime. And don't forget the over-the-counter medications, particularly those that have caffeine in them. Your sleeping environment, it should be mid-60s. You don't want it too warm. That will make it difficult to sleep. And your bedroom should be free from any noise that can disturb your sleep. I know people who, they work late and they have young children at home, and believe it or not, they wear earplugs to bed in order to get the right amount of sleep. Your bedroom should be free from any light. Remember, when that light comes up in the morning. In fact, some suggestion is if you're trying to get your teenagers out of bed, shine a flashlight in their eyes when you're asleep in the morning. That light will go through the eyelid and it helps to wake them up. Check your room for any noises or smells or other distractions. And, and that includes things like taking that beloved puppy dog to bed, right? That can certainly be distracting. Or having kids in bed with you. That certainly can be a distraction as well. Make sure your mattress and your pillows are comfortable and supportive. Do you need to get new ones? And make your room a sanctuary. Get rid of the clutter. Make it inviting for sleep. And also, if you have any allergies, make it free of any allergens that you're aware of. Stick to a regular schedule. This is so important. Keep bedtime and wake time consistent, even on the weekends when you're having difficulty sleeping. And don't get in the habit of spending, late nights on the computer, on your tablets, in front of the TV, because that can mess up those circadian rhythms. Take advantage of that natural light early in the day. It's good for your vitamin D levels as well. Although with this time of the year that's coming, it's certainly hard to synthesize enough vitamin D, but in general, getting some sun early in the day on our hands and face and arms and hands, that's certainly good for our vitamin D, but it helps those circadian rhythms. Find a way to relax. Not only shut off all the electronic devices and, wind down, get ready for bed. Maybe try a warm bath before bedtime. And as the body cools, it's a signal that you're tired, that you're ready to sleep. And, maybe you want to read, not a Kindle, but hardcover in sort of dim light. Listen to some soft music, maybe a little bit of yoga or breathing exercises. We want to deal with our stressors, remember, and some of these are very helpful. And don't forget meditation. And you can learn how to meditate. There are meditations you can find online. And finally, see your healthcare provider about any conditions which may impact your ability to get a good night's sleep. This is so important. If you go online and you check out the National Sleep Foundation, they have a sleep diary. And you can actually, I believe they allow you to print it out. And you can keep track of your sleep. And this is something you could bring to your healthcare provider. And you really need to do this if you're having trouble sleeping. And sleep hygiene is one of the first things that you want to focus on. You don't want to ask for a sleep aid, but rather take a look at your lifestyle and what can you fix without having to take any kind of medication, whether it's including earlier exercise, shutting the electronic devices, getting a little sun earlier in the day, watching the caffeine, the big meals, the alcohol, etc. We're at the end. I want to show you a number of resources. And these have some really good information. There's a great one at the bottom from drugs.com on caffeine. AARP has some good information on drugs and supplements that can cause insomnia. There's one from the government on risky driving and drowsy driving and connection with sleep. And others that, sort of reinforce what we've talked about today, why sleep is important and good for your health. And by the way, there's some new information if you're concerned about wrinkles, or if you're concerned about aging in general, physiological aging. Sleep is another important tool, to slow down those factors as well. So let's see if we have any questions or any comments in the chat. And I'm going to take a look. Sometimes I may have a glass of wine since our REM sleep is reduced. When should we? Generally, the recommendation is that we not drink alcohol for at least 4 hours before bedtime. That's the general recommendation. Okay. And I think we probably answered it for you. And how soon should we shut off the electronic devices? I would say about an hour, roughly. And, during that hour, you can prepare yourself for sleep. And by that, I mean wind down, change your into your bedclothes, brush your teeth. So you don't have to put on the blaring lights in the bathroom before you brush your teeth, etc., and sort of wake yourself up again. Prepare for bed. You can use that hour that you shut off the electronic devices and get ready for bed, and, whatever else you're going to do before you go to sleep. And Diane asks, what happened to the old adage of 8 hours of sleep per night? Well, that hasn't gone away. National Sleep Foundation, says everybody's a little different, somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. A lot of the studies are looking at it, roughly averaging it out, 7 and a half hours, 7 hours at least. And the concern is when we're getting to, 6.5, 6 hours. And some people are getting less than that, particularly our shift workers. Do we have any other questions? Also, feel free to make a comment if you have any comments or things that work for you. We'll take the last minute to do that. And let's see in the chat. Oh, glad I attended. Well, thank you very much, Gail. We hope you have a great day. And I don't see anything else here. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and a good night's sleep. And with that, bye-bye.